Hey folks, Lumpz the Clown here, and I was recently called out by my longtime YouTube compatriots, Heavy Metal Gamer and Alex Pleasant, to talk about which 5 games are the most nostalgic to me. First of all, when I hear the word nostalgic, I interpret it as something that goes beyond whether I think the game itself is still fun to play. Admittedly, some of these games that I'm about to discuss here may be interpreted by some as broken, boring, or otherwise shitty. No matter how I, or anyone else may feel about these games now, nostalgia allows me to look past all that shit and become the naive little clown that I used to be, before adulthood robbed me of my wide-eyed innocence. Back then, I didn't give a damn about silly things like game balance or control schemes, and simply played the fucking game. So in no particular order, here are the 5 games that take me back to the warm fuzzy feels of my clowny gamer past. Developed and released by Capcom in 1987, this is one of the first arcade games that I've ever played. I clearly remember my dad taking my brother and I to Pojo's on Sundays, handing us a small cache of quarters to split, and sending us out onto the floor. The first thing about Black Tiger that caught my eye was the marquee, which showed a one-armed guy facing off against a gang of skeletons. What made it even more surreal was the fact that he had a fucking morning star for a right arm. Instantly intrigued, I put in a quarter and hoped for the best. I wound up blowing all of my quarters on Black Tiger that first time, and even then I still had no idea that it incorporated RPG elements into its unforgiving action formula. In fact, I only was able to rescue one hostage and never even made it inside a shop. The snakes, blobs, and fire-tossing minotaurs were enough to spank my wannabe gamer ass into submission, and yet I was in love. Of course, trying to become the best of Black Tiger would have required a small fortune in quarters back then, but luckily, Capcom released it as the initial offering for their Capcom Arcade cabinet, which came out in 2013 for PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade. One free download later, I was able to relive the awesomeness of those early arcade days right in my own living room. Even then, I still get my ass handed to me to this day and have been unable to get further than Stage 2, but that hasn't stopped me from trying. Whenever I want to relive that wide-eyed wonder, I turn on Black Tiger and pretend that full-blown arcades in my area are still a thing.
This is Nancy at State Headquarters. We've got an emergency here.
Developed and released by Taito in 1988, Chase HQ broke from the tired track racer formula and put the player in hot pursuit of a fleeing suspect. However, simply catching up was only half the battle. Smashing their car into oblivion was the hook. And I wasn't the only one who wanted to get into the vehicle-smashing mayhem. Chase HQ always seemed to have a crowd around it, and the bumping sounds and feedback steering wheel were enough to get onlookers riled up. And playing it for yourself? Holy shit! Shoring up the cheesy Miami Vice-like vibe were the hilarious voiceovers. Jeez! And oh man! Were common when smashing a suspect's car into smithereens, all while Nancy gives out little quips like,
Nancy at State Headquarters. You keep butting around like that, time's gonna run out. Over.
Along with Black Tiger, Chase HQ was one of my earliest go-tos during those awesome Sundays at Pojo's, and if it can even rope in my non-gaming dad into checking it out, something magical has indeed happened. Alright, even I can admit that this game is probably the worst on this list in regards to quality, but you have to consider it from my perspective. A dust-covered Commodore 64 in a back room, with a pile of games almost as tall as my 3-foot whatever ass, and the one on top of the pile is none other than Master Tronox Intergalactic Cage Match. Developed by Hal Rushton, the game features either one-player or two-player action that pits 2 fighters against each other in a no-holds-barred cage match. The winner is the one who can successfully pummel their opponent and keep them down long enough for them to climb up the fence. The crowd cheers, the loser falls into the floor, and then unceremoniously returns the player to the main menu. So why is this nostalgic? My workaholic father and his wife both worked day jobs, which left me and my brother to our own devices during the summer. My stepmom's Commodore 64 offered a great breakaway from our well-used NES. For those who have owned one of these amazing computers, they would tell you that the Commodore 64 had some of the best sound chips ever invented, and resulted in some face-meltingly awesome soundtracks. Intergalactic Cage Match was no exception. Though it only seemed to feature 2 different soundtracks and about 2 sound effects, they were dynamic and interesting enough for me to forget all about the unresponsive controls and primitive gameplay. Hulk Hogan wrestling aliens in space? What's more awesome than that? Another game in that pile that caught my eye was Sword of Fargo. Lauded as one of the original roguelike dungeon crawlers, Sword of Fargo was developed by Jeff McCord in 1982 and released for the Commodore VIC-20 and shortly after the Commodore 64. Funny enough, this was the second Commodore 64 game I'd ever played, and its somewhat creepy ambiance still haunts me to this day. Again, you have to go back to the mind of a child and imagine what the marked lack of sound effects or music means to someone who grew up with horror flicks. Right before Freddy, Michael, or Jason jumps out, it gets quiet. Too quiet. So in essence, quiet equals death. And what does Sword of Fargo offer for background music? Absolutely nothing. Short of your own steps, the only sound that greets your ears is the ominous sound of enemy movement. In Sword of Fargo, the floor map is randomly generated and cloaked in darkness, leaving the player to explore what is in essence a death trap packed full of enemies that you can't see, and the only sound you hear is... The ultimate goal is to make your way down into the depths of the dungeon, retrieve the eponymous sword, and climb your way back out before the sword is destroyed. How long do you have before it's destroyed by the curse? Exactly 2,000 seconds, or 33 minutes and 20 seconds. Throw in the fact that the levels are once again covered in darkness, staircases going up are reduced to 1, and that enemies can steal the sword and force you to reappropriate it from the floor you found it on, makes our hero's journey a perilous one that is still held in reverence to this day. My last entry in the top 5 most nostalgic games is the awesome NES shooter, Gunsmoke. Ported from the arcade version and released in 1988, Gunsmoke was perhaps the first auto-scrolling vertical shmup I had ever played. Instead of set in a war zone or in outer space, this charming western shooter with awesome music casts the player as Billy Bob, tasked with taking out the notorious and bloodthirsty Wingate gang. The Wingates have killed the sheriff, and it's up to Billy Bob to drive them out of the dusty and illustrious community of Hicksville. Wait a minute, what? That's right, Hicksville. You can almost smell the cow turds right through your TV screen. Unlike the more straightforward arcade version, the NES version of Gunsmoke features viable weapon upgrades, epic boss fights, and atmospheric music that'll make you want to throw on your shit kickers and do the boot scoot boogie with a piece of wheat hanging out your mouth. I only had Gunsmoke for 2 days before my mom took it back to the rental store, but it made a lasting impression and prepared me for other great shooters like 1942 and Galaga. Funny how all it takes is one amazing game to open your eyes to an amazing genre. Even though I still can't get past stage 1 in Gunsmoke, I still enjoy trying. And before you go calling me a noob, remember that those one-hit kills can be a bitch. Silver Surfer, anyone? In fact, Gunsmoke made such an awesome first impression that it inspired me to perform my very first cosplay. As the fucking horse. Once a clown, always a clown, am I right? Thanks for watching, folks, and Lumpz the Clown out.